G'day, and welcome to my review for Shadow of the Comet, which is an Infograms game which uses the license from Chaosism Inc. to use the term Call of Cthulhu. Now, the guys at Chaosism Inc., like many people actually, have basically built an entire company by basing their work upon the work of a man named H.P. Lovecraft. Now, for those of you who have been living under a rock or just don't read, I'm going to give you a little bit of background on H.P. Lovecraft and the Cthulhu mythos, because it's such an integral part of this game. And in fact, the Cthulhu mythos is so fundamentally fascinating that it is what makes this game special. And this game is something special. It is probably one of the greatest horror games ever made in the adventure game genre. But as you play it, and as you get sucked into the story and you get more deeply involved in the characters, you start to realize that the game itself is just a vehicle for this amazing imagination that H.P. Lovecraft shared with the world. I would strongly recommend, and I mean strongly recommend, that if you haven't read H.P. Lovecraft's work, then go and read it. You will be stunned, like absolutely stunned, at the amount of stuff you've already heard of, because hundreds of authors in the last 100 years or so have basically been continuing his work. It is that powerful and that strong. Most of you who are watching these kind of videos that I make are probably avid gamers, so you know about H.P. Lovecraft's work in Cthulhu, because there are literally hundreds of games based on his work. And there's not just games, there's movies, there's a plethora of books, a huge number of comics, and even some alternative religions have co-opted his ideas into their doctrines. I actually know a man that used H.P. Lovecraft's work in his thesis on modern day myths, because the actual content of the mythos is still evolving in the same way that, say, the myth of fairies evolved in Ireland to create the concept of fairies that we now have today. And this doesn't even include the things that are inspired by H.P. Lovecraft. In the same way that you can pick up any fantasy book in any store and instantly understand a concept of elves and dwarfs given to us by Tolkien, it's the same with H.P. Lovecraft. You can pick up pretty much any horror book, the majority of even some science fiction, and you will see direct influences, not even mild influences, direct influences taken by this man's work. He's really one of the most influential authors in fiction. Well, I've obviously gotten a little off track here, so I'll get back to the game. The point is that the backstory of Cthulhu and the mythos around it is so intense that if you have a knowledge of this, the game is going to be extra special. Because while the game is about the Cthulhu mythos, it doesn't really go deeply into it. So if you already have this knowledge, then you'll already know all these backstories and these amazing tales, which really gives the entire game a lot more life. This game was made in 1992, and it does suffer a bit from its age. The original graphics were only 320 by 200 and in 256 colours, but they are especially good for that resolution. And as you can see, they're still quite effective today, especially if you're running DOSBox. You can stick everything on high quality 3, and it does a very good job of enlarging the screen without any loss and smoothing out the pixels, so it's recommended that you use that option. Also, due to the fact of its age, there's quite a bit of clunkiness in the interface. Now, this is because that most people will be playing the CD-ROM version. There is also a disc version. Now, the CD-ROM version was kind of like an update. It had all these extra features like mouse support. The actual game's core interface is all keyboard based. You have a number of hotkeys for look, get, use, etc, etc. And you control your character through direct input on the keyboard. Now, when they released the CD version, which is a better version, it has nicer sounds and audio for the voiceovers. They also added a kind of mouse input, but it's very flaky and pretty much you won't be using it. Instead of the standard point and click that you're used to, you simply hold down the left mouse button and the arrow points you in the way you're going. But it's just a lot easier and more natural to use the keyboard, so you'll probably end up doing that. Also, I hate to say it, but I've played this game a few times and I cannot tell you exactly how you use items together in the inventory. Sometimes it seems to work, sometimes it doesn't. I can't actually figure it out. I just keep clicking on it a few times until it works, and this can be quite frustrating. On top of that, this is a dangerous game, as in you die constantly. Now, it wasn't until later in the adventure game genre when they started to realise that a lot of players didn't like having to die and restart and saving all the time, you know, because a lot of people would forget to save. This was before autosave features and all those other fancy things. So in this game, you really have to be aware of saving, and I'm talking like saving every single screen by the time you get to day 2, because you will die constantly, like all the time, and that can also be incredibly frustrating for some players. But personally, I think it's a good thing. I like death in adventure games. I find that, especially in horror or serious games, the fear of death can really bring an excitement to adventure games which aren't normally there. And this really gives the game a feeling of coming to a climax, because it starts out as your normal kind of adventure game. You're just walking around, exploring, finding things out, and then it starts getting more and more and more dangerous. You start finding out these really bizarre secrets about the townspeople, and the fear of death, the fear of walking around even, becomes stronger and stronger, and this gives the entire game this tremendous feeling of momentum, which really adds to it, which really gives it a feeling of horror. One of the greatest problems in doing a horror game is that the actual character that you play is completely fearless. They walk into the darkest, scariest rooms, you know, just wander in there, they don't care. So it's really hard to give the player character, the actual character in the game that you're playing, it's really hard to give them fear, because you as the human who controls him are not really scared. So the fear of death is one of only 2 techniques I've seen used successfully that allows the player to feel some kind of anxiety. So I think it's an important thing and a good thing that there is death in this game and in many other games. But of course, many people don't agree with that. So if you don't like dying, don't play this game. The other way that this game suffers from its age is its direct line linearness. Now, except for some groundbreaking games like Hero's Quest, there was hardly any adventures that allowed you to take vastly alternative routes. And the problem with the early games in adventure games was that if you didn't do the exact route in the exact order, you could come against game blocks, and they are also in this game. If you make a mistake in a verbal conversation, you might miss a clue and that's it. You're lost, and you'll never ever solve that puzzle without the use of an FAQ. Or, in some cases, you can only use items in certain places. So if you have an item but you haven't read that letter, then that's it, you're stuck. And because the game is so simple in the coding, if you then read the letter elsewhere, it won't let you read it. So there are these real problems with this game, but you can't really expect much else. I mean, we are retro gaming, so you have to expect a certain evolution into today's games. These are things that they discovered through trial and error and through the way players reacted. The one thing that hasn't been improved, of course, in modern games is storyline, and this game has that in abundance. The story itself is based on the Dunwich Horror, The Shadow of Innsmouth, and the Necronomicon, 3 of Lovecraft's books, kind of all combined. So again, if you've read those, you're going to have some idea of where this is going to be going. In true Lovecraft style, it starts off with a man going insane, and then a scientist becoming interested in the area, going there and then discovering these darker truths. You play an astronomer who has been following the work of a man named Lord Boleskine, who is the crazy nutbag you see at the beginning. And you've gone to Innsmouth to observe Halley's Comet, to continue his work. But when you get there, you start to realise pretty quickly that this is one strange place, and very bizarre things are going on. So I would say if you are a serious adventure game player, there is no way you can miss this game. But if you're a more casual player, then you might find that the drawbacks from the ancient interface and some of the gameplay devices to be a little too much to handle. In my opinion, this is a masterpiece of a game, especially for its time, and I strongly recommend it. Thanks for watching.